My son brought his French fiancée to meet me. She was charming in English but told her parents in French, "This ugly cow's son is perfect. I'll marry him for green card then divorce for his inheritance." I smiled politely through dinner. As I left, I said in fluent French, "I loved meeting you all. I bet immigration will too." Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My Georgetown townhouse has always been a place of quiet, understated order, a reflection of a life spent in the hushed, high-stakes world of international diplomacy. The walls are a calm, dove gray, adorned not with flashy art, but with artifacts that tell a story. A carved Melian mask from my time in Bamako, a delicate Belgian lace fan from my posting in Brussels, a wall of books on foreign policy that could make a graduate student weep. It is a house built on nuance, on the understanding that the most important things are often left unsaid. Today, however, the house was filled with the loud, joyful, and entirely unambiguous sound of my son's happiness. Julian was practically vibrating with it. He paced the length of my Persian rug, his handsome face alight with a kind of radiant bliss that made him look 25 again, not a day over his 35 years. "You're going to love her, Mom. I mean, you've met her, but you're really going to love her," he said, his hands moving as he spoke, sketching out the shape of his adoration in the air. "She's just brilliant. We spent a week in the Loire Valley, and she knew the history of every single chateau. She was quoting 17th century poets in French, of course, and then we'd turn around and she'd be debating the merits of a brutalist building we saw in the city. Her mind is just incredible." He was talking, of course, about Émilie Dubois, his French fiancée of 6 months, the woman who had, in a remarkably short period, captured the entirety of my son's heart. I smiled. A warm maternal expression I had perfected over decades. It was a genuine smile. Seeing Julian this happy was a rare and precious gift. But it was also a diplomat's smile, a carefully constructed facade that masked 1,000 subtle observations and a deep, ingrained professional skepticism. "She sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my voice smooth and even. "I'm so looking forward to the dinner tonight, and to finally meeting her parents. They're great," Julian continued, oblivious to the nuances of my tone. "A little old-fashioned, you know. They own a small bookstore in Lyon. They're a bit overwhelmed by DC, but they're so excited. Amélie is everything to them." I thought of the life my son had built for himself. His boutique architecture firm was a resounding success, a testament to his talent and his relentless drive. He had inherited his father's keen eye for design, and I like to think my ambition. He moved in the highest circles of Washington, D.C., a world of fundraisers, gallery openings, and political soirées. It was a world that required a certain kind of partner, a woman of sophistication and grace. On the surface, Amélie, with her chic European style and her job at an international art gallery, was the perfect fit. She was a beautiful, cultured accessory to the life he was building. "She was so impressed with your background, Mom," Julian said, finally stopping his pacing to sit in the armchair opposite me. "She's read some of your old policy papers, the ones on West African trade agreements. She said she couldn't believe you were her future mother-in-law." I highly doubted Amélie had spent her evenings reading my dense academic papers on trade policy, but I appreciated the sentiment, or at least the cleverness of it. It was a well-played move, a demonstration of respect and intellectual curiosity designed to win over a formidable matriarch. And that's what worried me. It felt designed. Everything about Amélie felt a little too perfect, a little too polished. Julian's inheritance, I knew, was not just the considerable fortune his late father and I had built. It was the name, the connections, the access. In a city like Washington, that was the real currency. A marriage to Julian was not just a marriage, it was an acquisition of a powerful social and political infrastructure. I had no doubt that Amélie, with her sharp observant eyes, understood that perfectly. "Well, I am very much looking forward to getting to know her better," I said, my smile never wavering. I loved my son. I wanted him to be happy more than anything in the world. And if Amélie was the source of that happiness, I would do everything in my power to embrace her. But the diplomat in me, the woman who had spent 30 years reading the subtle signals in a person's eyes, the slight hesitation in their voice, the truth behind their carefully constructed words, had a small persistent file open on Amélie Dubois. And tonight, at dinner, I intended to gather more intelligence. After Julian left, his infectious happiness leaving a warm, buzzing energy in the room. I retreated to my study. This was my true domain, a room paneled in dark cherry wood, the walls lined with a lifetime of books and memories. There were photographs of me with presidents and prime ministers, with kings and queens, a gallery of handshakes and posed smiles that represented years of careful negotiation and hard-won trust. But my eyes were drawn to a single small silver frame on my desk. It is a picture of a 10-year-old Julian, a goofy, gap-toothed grin on his face, his arm thrown around my neck. It was a picture from our time in Senegal, a reminder of a simpler, more innocent life before the complexities of adulthood had clouded his world. I sank into my large leather chair, the familiar scent of old books and beeswax a comfort. The smile I had worn for Julian faded, replaced by the neutral, analytical expression of a woman deep in thought. I thought back on my few brief encounters with Amélie. They were like small, inconclusive intelligence briefings, each one leaving me with more questions than answers. The first time we'd met was at a fundraiser for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, a cause very dear to my heart. Julian had brought her to my table, and she had been the picture of charm and deference. She had complimented my dress, my work, the museum itself. But as we spoke, I noticed her eyes were not on me, but were constantly, subtly, scanning the room. She wasn't just observing, she was assessing. She'd ask questions about the other guests at our table, not about who they were but about what they did. And the gentleman with the red bow tie, she had asked, what is his connection to the museum? When I explained he was a major donor from a prominent banking family, a small, almost imperceptible gleam had appeared in her eyes. It was the look of a prospector who had just seen a glint of gold in a stream. Then there had been the casual lunch a few weeks later at a small bistro near her gallery. She had insisted on paying, a gesture of independence I had found admirable. But as she took out her wallet, she had accidentally dropped it. Its contents spilling across the table. Out slid a platinum credit card and a membership card to one of the most exclusive private clubs in Paris. It was a clumsy, almost theatrical display of a wealth and status that seemed at odds with her junior position at the gallery. I had helped her gather her things. A polite smile on my face, but the diplomat in me had registered the move for what it was. A piece of carefully managed stagecraft. She wasn't just having lunch with me. She was presenting her credentials. My mind, trained by years in the field, worked like a profiler, assembling these small, disparate pieces of data into a larger, still incomplete picture. My career had been built on reading people, on understanding the vast, complex landscape of human motivation. I remembered a tense negotiation in a sweltering room in Kinshasa, dealing with a warlord who was all smiles and promises of peace, but I had noticed the way his thumb nervously rubbed the handle of the pistol hidden beneath his robes. A tiny, repetitive gesture of anxiety that told me he was lying, that he was preparing for a betrayal. My gut instinct had saved lives that day. My gut was telling me something now. It was telling me that Amélie's performance was too polished, her charm too practiced. She was a woman playing a part, and she was playing it brilliantly. But then, the mother in me would argue back. Was I being fair? Or was I just a cynical old diplomat, hardened by a lifetime of dealing with liars and cheats, unable to recognize genuine happiness when it was staring me in the face? Was I projecting my own world weariness onto this young woman? Julian was no fool. He was a smart, successful man. Surely he would see through any artifice. I sighed, torn between my maternal instincts and my professional ones. I had spent my life navigating the treacherous waters of international relations, but the politics of my own son's heart felt like a far more dangerous and uncharted territory. I decided, in that moment, to suppress the diplomat. Tonight, I would simply be a mother. I would be warm. I would be welcoming, and I would give Amélie the benefit of the doubt. I would trust my son's judgment. It was a conscious, deliberate decision to ignore the alarm bells that were ringing softly in the back of my mind. A decision I would, before the night was over, come to regret with every fiber of my being. The day of the dinner was a study in controlled anticipation. I woke with a sense of purpose, the kind I used to feel before a major summit or a state dinner. The stakes, in their own way, felt just as high. The future happiness of my only son was on the line. I spent the morning not in a frantic state of preparation but in a quiet, methodical ritual of calming my own nerves. I did an hour of yoga in my sunroom, the gentle stretches and focused breathing a way of centering my mind, of pushing back the cynical diplomat and allowing the hopeful mother to come to the forefront. I tended to my small collection of orchids, their exotic patient beauty a reminder that some things simply cannot be rushed. I had chosen the restaurant with a diplomat's care. Le Diplômé on 14th Street was a perfect choice. It was a masterful recreation of a classic Parisian brasserie, always bustling, always loud, a place where intimate conversation was possible but privacy was an illusion. It was a neutral ground, a place that would, I hoped, make Amélie and her parents feel at home, while also allowing me to observe them in a dynamic public setting. My preparations were not just logistical, they were strategic. I chose my outfit with the care of a general choosing her uniform for a treaty signing. I selected a simple but exquisitely tailored silk dress in a deep sapphire blue, a color of calm authority. My jewelry was minimal, a single string of pearls, a gift from my late husband, and small elegant diamond stud earrings. My appearance was designed to be impeccable but not intimidating, a statement of quiet, confident elegance. Around noon my phone rang. It was Julian. His voice was tight with a nervous energy that was so transparent it was almost endearing. "Hey Mom," he began, a little too casually, "just checking in, you all set for tonight?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice warm and amused. "I'm looking forward to it. 7 o'clock at Le Diplômate, as planned." "Great, great," he said, and then he hesitated. I could hear the unspoken request behind his pause. "What is it, Julian?" I prompted gently. "It's just, Mom, you can be a little formidable," he finally managed to say, the word a mixture of pride and a plea. "Your career, your accomplishments, it can be a lot for people. Emily is so impressed by you, but she's also a little intimidated. And her parents, they're very simple people, from a small town." Lyon is not a small town, I thought, but I held my tongue. "What are you trying to say, Julian?" "Just be yourself," he said, the classic impossible request. "But you know, the welcoming mom version, not the Ambassador Devereaux's version. This is really important to me. I want them to love you and I want you to love them." A small sad smile touched my lips. He had no idea. He saw me as two separate people, the mother who made him pancakes on Sunday mornings, and the formidable ambassador whose picture was in history books. He had never understood that they were the same woman, that the skills that had made me a successful diplomat, the patience, the observation, the ability to read the subtle currents in a room, were the very same skills I used as a mother. He saw my discerning nature as a threat to his happiness, not as my most powerful tool for protecting it. "Julian, darling," I said, my voice a soothing balm on his anxiety. "I promise you, tonight I will be nothing but a charming future mother-in-law. Everything will be fine. Now stop worrying and go pick out a handsome tie." He let out a sigh of relief. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best. We'll see you at 7. I hung up the phone, the smile fading from my face. My son, my brilliant, successful son, had just asked me to come to the most important negotiation of his life, and to leave my sharpest tools at home. He was walking into a potential ambush and had just asked his only lookout to wear a blindfold. A familiar weary resolve settled over me. Fine. I would play the part he had assigned me. I would be the charming, slightly naive matriarch. But beneath the smiles and the polite conversation, the ambassador would be on high alert, and she would be taking notes. Le Diplômate was in full glorious swing when I arrived. The vast tiled dining room was a cacophony of clinking glasses, spirited conversation, and the confident ballet of waiters navigating the tightly packed tables. The air smelled of garlic, butter, and expensive perfume. It was a perfect illusion of Paris, a stage set for an evening of sophisticated revelry. I saw them before they saw me. They were already seated at a prime corner banquette, a small island of anticipation in the bustling sea of the restaurant. Julian saw me first, his face breaking into a wide, relieved smile. He stood up, waving me over. The introductions were a flurry of handshakes, air kisses, and performative delight. Emily was, as always, flawless. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress that probably cost more than my first car, her dark hair swept up in a chic, effortless knot. She greeted me in her perfect, charmingly accented English. "Vivian, you look absolutely stunning," she said, her smile dazzling. "I am so happy you are here. These are my parents, Jean-Luc and Isabelle." Her parents were the very picture of French provincial charm. Jean-Luc was a small, dapper man with a neatly trimmed mustache and kind, smiling eyes. Isabelle was a handsome woman with a soft, shy demeanor, clutching her handbag as if it were a life raft in this overwhelming new world. They both beamed at me, their English halting but warm, full of profuse thanks for my hospitality. "It is an honor to meet the mother of our future son," Jean-Luc said, his hand on his heart. "You have raised a wonderful boy," Isabelle added, her eyes shining with what appeared to be genuine maternal warmth. The charm offensive was in full effect, and it was masterful. For the first 20 minutes, as we settled in and ordered a bottle of Sancerre, the conversation was a light, frothy affair. They asked me polite questions about my home, about Georgetown, about the beautiful autumn weather. Amélie acted as the perfect bridge, translating for her parents when they struggled for a word, laughing at Julian's jokes, and showering me with a constant, gentle stream of compliments. "Julian tells me you are a passionate gardener, Vivian," she said, her eyes wide with interest. "I would so love to see your orchids sometime." I smiled, a polite, non-committal expression. "Of course," I said, while the diplomat in me noted the efficiency of her intelligence gathering. Julian had clearly given her a detailed briefing on my hobbies and interests. I watched them, my senses on high alert beneath my calm maternal facade. I noted the details. Isabelle's handbag, which she clutched so tightly, was a high-end designer brand. A strange choice for a shy woman who supposedly ran a small, struggling bookstore. Jean-Luc's shoes were handmade Italian leather, exquisitely polished. They were performing the role of humble, provincial parents. But their props were all wrong. They were telling one story with their words and another, far more expensive one, with their accessories. Julian, of course, saw none of this. He was basking in the warm glow of the evening, thrilled that his two worlds were merging so seamlessly. He was proud of Amélie's effortless grace, proud of his mother's charm, proud of this perfect happy family he was creating. The wine arrived, and the waiter poured. Amélie raised her glass. "A toast," she said, her voice full of a beautiful, false sincerity. "To family, the one we are born into, and the one we are lucky enough to choose." We all raised our glasses. "To family," we echoed. I looked over the rim of my glass at the three of them, at their smiling, charming, beautifully costumed faces, and I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the crisp, cold wine. The performance was flawless, but I knew with a certainty that was as cold and as hard as the diamond on my finger, that it was a performance, and the first act was just about to end. The first course arrived, a beautiful arrangement of escargots and fresh, crusty bread. The conversation continued in its light, pleasant, English language channel. Julian was telling a story about a difficult client at his architecture firm, a story he had clearly told before, and Amélie was laughing in all the right places, her eyes sparkling with adoration. Her parents, though their understanding was limited, smiled and nodded along, their expressions ones of pure parental delight. I was beginning to relax, to let my guard down. Maybe my instincts were wrong. Maybe I had become too cynical, too suspicious after a lifetime of navigating deceit. Perhaps this was all genuine. Perhaps this beautiful, charming young woman truly loved my son, and her parents were simply good people, happy for their daughter. It was Jean-Luc who made the move. He finished a piece of bread, dabbed his mustache with his napkin, and turned to me with a warm, apologetic smile. "Madame Devereux, Vivian," he began, his English slow and careful. "You are most gracious, but my wife, Isabelle, she is very shy with her English. She wishes to tell you how happy she is for our children, how much she already loves your son, but the words, they do not come easily to her in your language. It is a wall for her heart." He looked at his wife, who gave a small, timid nod of agreement, her eyes downcast. It was a beautiful performance of vulnerability. "If you do not mind," Jean-Luc continued, his gaze earnest and pleading, "perhaps for a little while we may speak in our own tongue. It would make her so much more comfortable." Julian, ever the gracious host, jumped in immediately, his face full of a generous, understanding sympathy. "Oh, of course. Please. That's a wonderful idea. You must feel at home." "Maman," he said, turning to me, his high school French a clumsy, earnest thing. "Tu parles un peu français, n'est-ce pas? C'est d'accord? Mom, you speak a little French, right? It's okay?" This was the moment, the pivot, the critical juncture in the evening's negotiations. Every instinct I had, honed over 30 years of diplomatic encounters, screamed at me. This was not a request for comfort. It was a strategic maneuver. They were seeking the cover of a language they believed I could not fully comprehend. They were trying to draw a curtain, to create a space where they could speak freely, believing me to be on the other side, able to catch only a few stray, harmless words. My mind raced through the possibilities. I could reveal myself now. I could reply in my own fluent Parisian French, and watch the shock dawn on their faces. But that would be a premature move. It would show my hand too early. It would end the game before I had gathered all the necessary intelligence. A good diplomat never interrupts an opponent when they are in the process of making a fatal mistake. So I chose to play the part my son had assigned me. The charming but slightly clueless American mother. I gave them a warm, slightly hesitant smile. I looked at Isabel with what I hoped was an expression of maternal sympathy. And then, in a slow, carefully broken French, I delivered my line. Oui, I said, deliberately mangling the pronunciation just enough to be convincing. Un petit peu. Yes. A little bit. I added a small, self-deprecating laugh. My French is very old, from school. Please, speak as you wish. I will try to follow. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. It was like a collective silent exhalation. Julien beamed, thrilled with my graciousness. Gianluca and Isabel exchanged a look. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of shared victory. Emily gave me a smile of such dazzling condescending sweetness. It was almost an insult. The trap was now set. They had built it themselves out of their own arrogance and their profound underestimation of the woman sitting across from them. And I had just with a polite, demure smile, willingly walked right into it. They thought they had just secured their privacy. In reality, they had just handed me a front row seat to their own self-destruction. The shift was instantaneous. It was as if a switch had been flipped. A carefully constructed stage set dismantled in a second. The moment the conversation flowed into the familiar, comfortable currents of their native French, the entire demeanor of the Dubois family changed. The performative wide-eyed charm vanished, replaced by a casual, almost bored cynicism. They were no longer guests in a foreign land. They were insiders, speaking in a code they believed was unbreakable. Amélie, who had been a vision of demure adoration just moments before, leaned back against the red leather of the banquette, a look of profound weariness on her face. She picked up her wine glass and took a long, unladylike swallow. Franchement, she said, her voice dropping a full octave, losing its musical, accented English lilt and taking on a flat, dismissive tone. C'est une copie passable, trop bruyant, typiquement américain. Frankly, it's a decent copy, too loud, typically American. Julien, whose French was good enough to catch the gist of the sentence but not its sneering, contemptuous tone, just nodded along with a smile, happy that they were conversing. Oui, c'est très populaire, he said, proud of his contribution. Yes, it's very popular. Isabel, the shy wife, suddenly found her voice. It was not the soft, hesitant voice of a woman intimidated by a new language. It was a sharp, practical and deeply greedy one. Et la maison? She asked, her eyes darting around the restaurant as if assessing its value. Est-elle aussi grande qu'elle en a l'air sur les photos? And the house? Is it as big as it looks in the pictures? Plus grande, Emily replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. Remplie de vie et folie africaine. Mais la valeur immobilière est astronomique. On vendra tout ça, bien sûr. Bigger, filled with old African junk. But the real estate value is astronomical. We'll sell all that, of course. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my Sancerre. The wine was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the hot molten rage that was beginning to build in the pit of my stomach. Vieux Africains. Old African junk. She was talking about my collection, about pieces of art and history that represented years of my life, years of building relationships and understanding cultures, and she had reduced them to junk to be liquidated. I kept a polite, slightly vacant smile on my face. I was a statue, a pleasant piece of background scenery in the drama of their greed. Jean-Luc, the dapper, charming father, then leaned forward, his expression turning serious, conspiratorial. Le plus important, ma chérie, he said, his voice a low murmur. Le garçon, es-tu sûre de lui? Il n'est pas trop, madame. The most important thing, my darling, the boy. Are you sure of him? He isn't too clever? I had to clench my hand into a fist under the table to keep from reacting. He was questioning my son's intelligence, asking if he was smart enough to see through their scheme. He was assessing Julien as one would assess a mark. Emily let out a small, sharp, ugly laugh. It was a sound utterly devoid of the warmth and charm she had so expertly deployed in English. It was the sound of a predator confident in the helplessness of its prey. She looked directly at me, her eyes passing over my face as if I were a piece of furniture. In that moment she was so confident in my ignorance, so certain of her own superiority that she felt completely safe, and in that bubble of arrogant security she finally beautifully and catastrophically revealed the full, monstrous truth of her heart. The moment felt suspended in time. The bustling noise of the restaurant, the clatter of plates, the murmur of 100 conversations, the cheerful pop of a champagne cork, all of it faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. The world was reduced to the space between me and the woman sitting opposite me, the woman my son loved, the woman who was about to vivisect our lives with a few casually tossed-off French words. Isabelle, emboldened by her daughter's dismissive laugh, leaned forward, her earlier shyness completely gone, replaced by a keen practical greed. "Et la mère?" she asked, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Est-elle généreuse? The inheritance. It is secure. And the mother, is she generous?" The question was so crass, so breathtakingly transactional, that it almost took my breath away. They were discussing my death and the subsequent looting of my estate as if they were planning a weekend holiday. Emily took another sip of wine, her eyes glittering with a cold, cruel amusement. She then turned her gaze fully on me. She looked right at me, a polite, dismissive smile on her lips, a smile that was a mask for the profound contempt she was about to express. She was so confident in my inability to understand, so wrapped up in her own cleverness that she felt completely and utterly invincible. And then she spoke the words that would forever sever her from our family. The words that would detonate the happy, oblivious world my son had built around himself. "Oh, cette vieille vache," she said, the French words for this ugly cow rolling off her tongue with a smooth, practiced ease. The insult was so casual, so unthinking, it was clear this was how she truly saw me. Not as a respected diplomat, not as a future mother-in-law, but as a piece of livestock to be managed. She then looked over at Julien, and her expression softened into a perfect theatrical mask of adoration. "Son fit c'est parfait," she continued, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that was meant for her parents but was performed for my son's benefit. A son she believed was deaf to her real meaning. Complètement idiot et fou amoureux. Her son is perfect, a complete idiot and madly in love. My knuckles were white where I gripped the stem of my wine glass under the table. I focused on a point just over her shoulder, my face a perfect serene mask of polite interest. The discipline of 1,000 tense diplomatic meetings took over, a lifetime of training in the art of concealing one's true thoughts. Inside, a glacier was cracking, a cold, silent, and unstoppable rage beginning to move. "Je l'épouserai pour la quat'vette, bien sûr," she said, finally laying the ugly, unvarnished truth on the table. "Puis je divorcerai pour son héritage une fois que je serai citoyenne. I'll marry him for the green card, of course, and then I'll divorce him for his inheritance once I'm a citizen." The confession was so bald, so utterly devoid of any human decency, that it was almost a thing of beauty in its pure crystalline evil. This wasn't just about money, it was a long con, a meticulously planned operation with clear sequential objectives. Citizenship first, then the fortune. My son was not a partner, he was a stepping stone, a tool, a means to an end. I risked a glance at Julien. He was beaming. He had caught the words "filles te fafe and fou amoureux," and had interpreted them in his blissful ignorance as a declaration of his fiancée's deep and abiding love. He was nodding along, a happy, foolish smile on his face, a lamb blissfully unaware that the wolves at his table were discussing the best way to butcher him. The sight of his innocent, trusting face, juxtaposed with the cold, reptilian cruelty of the woman he loved, was a pain more profound than any I had ever known. It was a heartbreak so complete it transcended anger and settled into a realm of cold, hard, and absolute resolve. This was no longer just about my feelings or my fortune. This was about protecting my son from the predator who was preparing to devour him whole. The game had changed. This was no longer a negotiation. It was an extraction. The poison having been administered, the Dubois family now saw fit to celebrate their impending victory. Jean-Luc, the dapper patriarch, the man who had so convincingly played the part of the humble, awestruck provincial, now revealed himself to be the proud and willing co-conspirator in his daughter's scheme. He picked up his wineglass, a look of profound paternal pride on his face. He held it up, the crystal catching the light of the brass chandeliers, and he smiled, first at his daughter, then at his wife. He completely ignored me and Julien, as if we were merely background scenery for their private, triumphant moment. "Un autre fille si intelligente," he said, his voice a low, smug declaration. The French was rich with satisfaction. "Et à la fortune de Devereux." To our clever daughter, and to the Devereux fortune. Then, with a final, audacious twist of the knife, he added, Qu'elle soit bientôt la nôtre. May it soon be our own. Isabelle, the shy, timid bookstore owner, beamed at her husband and daughter, her eyes shining with a hard, avaricious light. She raised her glass in enthusiastic agreement. Amélie, her face a perfect mask of triumphant modesty, raised her own glass to meet her father's. The three of them were a perfect, predatory triangle of greed. They clinked their glasses together over the center of the table, the clear ringing sound a death knell for my son's happy oblivious world. And then, the most painful and surreal moment of the entire evening occurred. Julien, seeing the celebratory gesture, hearing the happy familiar sound of clinking glasses, and understanding nothing but the universal language of a toast, broke into a wide happy grin. He thought they were toasting to his and Amélie's future, to the merging of their two families. He thought they were celebrating him. He picked up his own glass and, leaning across the table, enthusiastically clinked it against theirs. Santé, he said, using one of the few French words he knew with confidence. To family. Health. To family. I watched this scene unfold, this grotesque parody of a happy family moment, and I felt a profound, almost out-of-body detachment. It was as if I were watching a play, a brilliantly acted tragedy where I was the only one in the audience who knew the devastating final act. My son, the hero of his own love story, was happily toasting his own executioners. I knew I had to join in. To abstain would be to signal my suspicion, to break the character I was so carefully playing. So, with a hand that was miraculously steady, I lifted my own wine glass. I met the triumphant, condescending eyes of Jean-Luc, the greedy, impatient ones of Isabelle, and the cold, reptilian ones of Amélie. I gave them a small, serene smile, a smile that conveyed nothing but the polite, slightly vacant warmth of the woman they believed me to be. And then, I raised my glass and gently, almost imperceptibly, touched it to theirs. To the future, I said softly, in English, my voice calm and even. They all smiled back at me, their victory now complete. They had fooled the son, they had neutralized the mother. The fortune was theirs for the taking. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cold, crisp wine. It tasted of ashes. The diplomat in me was in full control, my face a mask of impenetrable calm, but the mother in me was weeping, a silent, heartbroken scream for the innocent, trusting boy who was sitting beside me, smiling, completely unaware that his whole world was about to burn to the ground. And I, his mother, would be the one to light the match. The rest of the dinner was an exercise in extreme self-control. I had to sit there at a table crackling with a secret malevolent energy, and continue to play the part of the pleasant, slightly dim-witted American matriarch. Every bite of food felt like swallowing sand, every polite smile a monumental effort of will, but I did it. I did it because with every word they spoke, they were handing me more rope with which to hang them. They had become comfortable, emboldened by their own cleverness, and my perceived ignorance. The conversation in French flowed freely, a river of greed and contempt. They had moved on from the initial shock of their plan and were now delving into the delightful practical details of how they would spend my money. The house in Georgetown, Isabelle mused, her eyes half closed as if picturing it. It has good bones, but the decor is so dated, all that dark wood. We will need to hire a proper designer to bring it into this century. Something bright and modern. The first thing to go will be that African junk, Amélie said with a shudder of distaste. We can sell it to a museum perhaps. Or just a collector, use the money to buy some real art, a Warhol maybe. I thought of the collection I had spent a lifetime curating. The carved wooden staff from the Dogon people of Mali. A piece so rare and spiritually significant it was practically priceless. The intricate beadwork of a Zulu ceremonial necklace. Each piece was a memory, a relationship, a piece of a culture's soul. And they were discussing it as if it were a pile of old furniture to be disposed of at a garage sale. To keep them talking, to plumb the depths of their depravity, I decided to risk a question. I leaned forward, my expression one of naive maternal curiosity. I crafted a sentence in my broken high school French, making it as simple and as childlike as possible. Art, I began, deliberately fumbling with the words. Est-il important? The art, is it important? Jean-Luc and Amélie exchanged a look of pure, condescending amusement. They saw me as a simpleton, a foolish woman who didn't even understand the value of her own possessions. Oh, Vivian, it is not just important, Jean-Luc explained, his tone slow and patronizing, as if he were speaking to a particularly slow child. It is an asset class. The right pieces can appreciate in value faster than any stock. Your collection, from what Amélie tells me, is quite significant, a very wise investment. My late husband was the collector, I said in English, letting them believe I was a clueless widow who had simply inherited things she didn't understand. Of course, Jean-Luc said with a sympathetic nod, before switching back to French for his daughter's benefit. The dead husband. Perfect. It means the provenance is clean and she has no emotional attachment to the individual pieces. It will make the liquidation much simpler. The conversation then turned to Julien. They spoke of him not as a person but as a problem to be managed, a temporary inconvenience on their path to wealth. He is more sentimental than I expected, Amélie complained, swirling the wine in her glass. He talks about his vision for his firm, about legacy. It's all so tiresome. I will have to slowly wean him off the idea of actually working once we are married. He is a boy playing with building blocks, Jean-Luc said with a dismissive shrug. He has a charming little hobby. We will indulge him in it, as long as it does not interfere with the real business of managing the estate. All the while Julien, my poor dear oblivious son, was doing his best to participate. He would catch a word he understood, art, business, legacy, and he would nod along eagerly, trying to contribute in his clumsy French. Oui, oui, he would say, l'héritage est très important. Yes, yes, the inheritance is very important. He had no idea they were agreeing with him on a level of dark, cynical irony that was almost poetic. Each of his earnest contributions was met with their bright, false smiles, their condescending praise. Your son has a good heart, Vivian, Isabelle said to me in English, patting my hand. A bit of an idealist, perhaps, but a good heart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and flip the table to expose them for the vipers they were, but I held my ground. The diplomat in me knew that a premature move, an emotional outburst, would lose me the strategic advantage. I needed to let them play their entire hand. I needed to let them feel completely, utterly secure in their deception. The waiter came to clear our plates. As he reached for mine, I looked at him and saw, in his tired professional eyes, a reflection of my own exhaustion. We were both playing a part, serving a table of people who saw us as little more than background characters in their own self-important drama. The only difference was, my performance was about to come to a very dramatic end. The end of the meal was a masterpiece of performative cordiality. As the waiter brought the check, a bill of astonishing size that Julien insisted on paying with a proud, happy flourish, the Dubois family seamlessly transitioned back into their English-speaking characters. The cynical, greedy plotters vanished, replaced once more by the charming, slightly overwhelmed French family who were just so delighted to be here. We stood up from the table, the air thick with false sentiment. Vivian, this has been the most wonderful evening, Isabelle said, her hand clutching her heart as if she were overwhelmed with emotion. You have made us feel so very welcome. The pleasure was all mine, Isabelle, I replied, my smile as smooth and as polished as the pearls at my neck. We made our way through the crowded restaurant, a perfect, happy, blended family in the making. Julien was walking on air, his arm wrapped possessively around Amélie's waist, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face. The evening had been a resounding success. His mother had been charming, his fiancée's family had been delightful. His two worlds had merged without a single discordant note. As we stepped out into the cool DC night, the valet was already waiting with our cars. The air was filled with the sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic on 14th Street. There was a flurry of goodbyes, the classic European double-cheek kisses, a dance of choreographed affection. Amélie turned to me last. She took both of my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly firm, her eyes shining with a brilliant false sincerity. It was a true pleasure to finally meet you properly, Vivian, she said, her voice a low, intimate murmur. I feel like we truly connected tonight. I am so looking forward to being your daughter. I looked into her beautiful lying eyes, and I felt a profound, almost pitying sense of superiority. She thought she had won. She thought I was a fool, a simple, sentimental old woman who had been completely taken in by her charm. She had no idea that for the past hour and a half I had been watching her not as a future mother-in-law, but as a biologist observes a particularly fascinating and venomous species of snake. I feel we connected as well, Amélie, I said, my voice warm, my smile never faltering. Julien beamed, his heart so full of happiness it was practically bursting from his chest. See, Mom? He said, pulling me into a quick, happy hug. I told you you'd love them. You were right, sweetheart, I said, patting his back, the lie a bitter pill I swallowed for his sake. Their car, a sleek black town car they had hired for the evening, pulled up to the curb. Jean-Luc held the door for his wife, and Amélie prepared to get in. The performance was almost over. It was time for my final line. As the valet pulled my own car, a discreet but powerful German sedan, up behind theirs, I turned to the Dubois family. They were all smiling at me, a final triumphant wave goodbye. I gave them a smile in return, a smile that was different from the one I had been wearing all night. This one was dazzling. It was sharp. It was the smile of a woman who is about to win, and knows it. And then, in a voice that was no longer hesitant or broken, but was suddenly shockingly fluent, a flawless, unaccented Parisian French, that was more refined than their own, I delivered my parting shot. J'ai été ravie de faire votre connaissance, I said. My voice as clear and as cold as ice. The words were polite, the standard farewell. I was delighted to make your acquaintance. I held their stunned, confused gazes for a beat, and then I delivered the final devastating blow. Je parie que les services d'immigration le seront aussi. I bet immigration will be too. The effect of my words was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. It was as if I had thrown a grenade into the middle of their cozy, self-satisfied little world. The smiles vanished from the faces of Amélie, Jean-Luc and Isabelle as if they had been wiped clean by an invisible hand. They were replaced by identical masks of pure, slack-jawed, abject horror. The blood drained from their faces, leaving them looking pale and ghastly under the warm, yellow glow of the restaurant's awning. Jean-Luc, who had been holding the car door for his wife, let his hand drop, and the heavy door swung shut with a dull final thud. Isabelle let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her throat. But the most satisfying reaction was Amélie's. Her beautiful, sophisticated face, the face that had so captivated my son, completely dissolved, the mask of charm and culture vaporized, revealing the raw, terrified, and common creature beneath. Her eyes were wide with a frantic, cornered animal panic. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. She understood. She understood everything in a single heart-stopping flash of comprehension. The game was up. The con was over. The ugly cow not only spoke their language, she spoke it better than they did. And she had heard everything. Julien, of course, was in a state of complete and utter bewilderment. He had heard my words. He had recognized the language. But the fluency, the sudden shocking shift from his formidable mother to this cool, lethal stranger speaking perfect French, had short-circuited his brain. He looked from my calm, smiling face to the three horror-stricken faces of the Dubois family, and his own face was a mask of pure confusion. "What?" he said, his head swiveling back and forth. "What did you say, Mom? Amélie, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Amélie didn't answer. She just stared at me, her eyes pleading, begging, a silent, frantic negotiation with the executioner who was about to bring the axe down on her neck. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need to. My work was done. I had planted the seed of chaos, and now I would step back and watch it grow. I gave the Dubois family one last, long, knowing look. A look that promised them that this was only the beginning. Then I turned to the valet who was holding the door of my sedan open. "Thank you, Robert," I said to him, my voice once again my normal, calm, English-speaking self. I slipped into the driver's seat of my car, the cool leather a comfort. I didn't look back at the chaotic, imploding scene on the sidewalk. I simply put the car in gear, and pulled out into the stream of Washington, D.C. traffic, my movements smooth and unhurried. In my rearview mirror I could see them, a small frantic cluster of figures under the restaurant lights. Julien was trying to talk to Amélie, his hands on her arms, his face a mess of confusion and concern. She was shaking her head frantically, her parents hovering behind her like two frightened crows. I drove through the city, the familiar monuments lit up against the dark night sky, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, symbols of power, of history, of truths that were supposed to be self-evident. My own truth had been anything but. It had been hidden, obscured, nearly stolen from me, but now, it was out. The diplomat in me felt a grim sense of professional satisfaction. The trap had been sprung. The enemy was in disarray. The intelligence had been gathered, and the strategic advantage was now entirely mine. But the mother in me was heartbroken. I had just saved my son from a predator. But in doing so I had been forced to detonate the foundations of his happiness. The conversation that was about to happen between Julien and Amélie, the one that was currently happening as they drove away in their own car, would be the beginning of the end of his beautiful, perfect love story. I had protected my child, but the cost would be his heart. And as I drove home through the quiet, elegant streets of Georgetown, I felt not a sense of triumph, but the profound, weary sorrow of a queen who has won a war but has lost a part of her own kingdom in the process. The scene in Julian's car, as I had predicted, was one of pure, frantic chaos. The moment the doors were closed, sealing them in the intimate, luxurious space, Amélie's composure completely shattered. The cool, sophisticated Parisian was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked woman on the verge of hysteria. What was that? What did she mean? Immigration? Julian demanded, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He was no longer the happy, love-struck man from dinner. His voice was hard, his eyes sharp with a suspicion that was finally painfully breaking through the fog of his infatuation. Nothing, Amélie insisted, her voice a high, brittle thing. It was nothing. A misunderstanding. A joke. My English, your mother's French. It is a confusing mix. She misunderstood something I said. Her parents, huddled in the back seat, were a chorus of frantic whispered French. She knows, Isabelle was muttering, wringing her hands. Jean-Luc, she heard everything. We are ruined. Be quiet, Mama. Amélie hissed at her over her shoulder before turning back to Julian, her face a mask of pleading desperation. Julian, darling, you must believe me. Your mother, she can be a little dramatic, no? She is trying to cause trouble between us. She is jealous of our love. It was a classic, desperate gambit. Blame the mother, but it was too little, too late. Julian was an architect. A man who built his life on logic and precision. He had seen the raw, undiluted terror on their faces. He had seen the way the blood had drained from their cheeks. The way their confident smiles had dissolved into masks of pure horror. That was not the reaction to a simple misunderstanding. That was the reaction of conspirators who had just been caught. A joke? Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. A joke that makes your father look like he's about to have a heart attack? Amélie, I am not an idiot. You will tell me what you said at that table. You will tell me what she heard. Now, her lies became more frantic, more convoluted. She tried to invent a story about a French idiom, a crude joke about marrying for money that was, she insisted, a common, ironic expression of love among her friends. The story was so flimsy, so transparently false, that it was an insult to his intelligence. He didn't argue with her. He just drove, his face a cold, hard mask. He drove them back to their upscale hotel near DuPont Circle. He pulled up to the curb, put the car in park and turned to her. His eyes, which had always looked at her with such adoration, were now cold and empty. Get out, he said, his voice flat. Julian. No, please, she begged, tears finally streaming down her face. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of fear. Let me explain. There is nothing to explain, he said. I am going to go and speak to my mother, and I am going to find out the truth. And then you and I, we will be finished. Get out of my car. He didn't need to say it again. She and her parents scrambled out onto the sidewalk, a pathetic, defeated trio, their grand American dream in ruins. Julian didn't watch them go. He just pulled away from the curb, his tires squealing slightly, and drove straight to Georgetown, straight to me, straight to the terrible, heartbreaking truth he knew, on some level, was waiting for him. The mask of his perfect love story had shattered, and he was about to be forced to look at the ugly, unvarnishable reality that lay beneath. Julian drove through the manicured, tree-lined streets of Georgetown with a reckless, uncharacteristic speed. His mind was a chaotic storm of confusion, suspicion, and a deep, sickening dread. He was a man whose entire reality had been thrown into question. The woman he loved, the woman he had been planning to spend the rest of his life with, had a look of pure animal terror on her face. And his mother, the woman he thought he knew, had been the one to put it there. He arrived at my townhouse and used his key to let himself in, his movements sharp and angry. I was waiting for him in my study. I had poured 2 glasses of a very old, very good brandy, and had placed them on the small table between 2 leather armchairs. I had also placed a small, discreet digital audio recorder on the polished wood of my desk. You need to tell me what that was about, he demanded the moment he walked into the room, his voice raw with a pain and anger he didn't yet fully understand. You humiliated them, Mom? You humiliated me. What did you say to them? And how do you suddenly speak French like you were born in Paris? I looked at him, at the handsome, angry, and deeply wounded face of my son, and my heart ached for him. But this was not a time for comfort. It was a time for truth. A truth that would be as clean and as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "Sit down, Julian," I said, my voice calm and even. I gestured to the armchair opposite me. He hesitated, still vibrating with a furious energy, but something in my tone, some echo of a maternal authority he hadn't heard in years, made him obey. He sank into the chair, his body tense. "I did not humiliate them, Julian," I said, my voice quiet. "They humiliated themselves, and they were about to humiliate you in a way that would have destroyed your life. I simply translated for you." "Translated what?" he shot back. What could they possibly have said that was so terrible? I did not answer him with words. I reached over to my desk, picked up the small black audio recorder, and pressed the play button. "I believe," I said, my voice as gentle as I could make it, "that you should hear the evening for yourself." The sound that filled the silent, book-lined study was the familiar clattering down of the diplomate. And then, the voices. His own, happy and oblivious. And theirs. Speaking the language he did not understand. He listened, his brow furrowed in confusion at first. He heard Amelie's dismissive comment about the restaurant, her lie about my art collection. He heard her father question his intelligence. He was starting to look pale, and then he heard it. He heard Amelie's sharp, ugly laugh. He heard her in her own clear, unmistakable voice. "Call me an ugly cow." He heard her call him a complete idiot. And then he heard the final devastating confession. "I'll marry him for the green card, of course. And then I'll divorce him for his inheritance once I'm a citizen." The color drained completely from his face. He looked as if he had been physically struck. He stared at the small black device on the desk as if it were a venomous snake spitting out a poison that was seeping directly into his soul. I let the recording play. He heard her father's proud, triumphant toast to their clever daughter and the Devereux fortune. And then, the most painful and excruciating part of all, he heard himself. He heard his own happy, booming voice joining their toast. He heard himself say, "Santé," to family, his own words, a tragic, ironic soundtrack to his own betrayal. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Julian did not move. He just sat there, staring into the middle distance, his face a mask of pure, shattered devastation. The love story he had believed in so completely, the future he had been so excited to build, had all been a lie, a cold, calculated, and deeply cruel conjuring. And he had been the mark. A single silent tear traced a path down his cheek. He did not make a sound. The architect, the man who built strong, beautiful, enduring structures, had just had the entire foundation of his own life demolished. And the quiet, formidable woman who had done it, the mother he had never truly known, was sitting right in front of him. The silence in my study was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the soft, rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock and the sound of my son's world collapsing. He sat frozen in the leather armchair, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the small digital recorder on my desk as if it were the black box recovered from a plane crash containing the irrefutable, devastating evidence of the disaster. I gave him the time he needed. A diplomat knows that after a bombshell has been dropped, you allow the dust to settle. You let the other party process the full, catastrophic scope of their new reality before you begin to discuss the terms of surrender. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he moved. He lowered his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking with a silent, racking sob. The sound was not the loud, performative grief of a man seeking sympathy. It was the quiet, broken sound of a man's heart shattering. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed and filled with a pain so profound it was almost difficult to look at. But beneath the pain, a new emotion was beginning to surface, a cold, hard, and unfamiliar fury. The fury of a man who has been made a fool of. "How," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. "How could I have been so blind?" "You weren't blind, Julian," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You were in love. And they were very, very good at their jobs. It was a professional-grade deception. It would have fooled anyone who wasn't trained to spot it. But you spotted it," he said, looking at me with a new dawning sense of awe and confusion. "You knew, from the beginning?" "I suspected," I corrected him. "My instincts told me something was amiss, but I had no proof, and I would never have acted on instinct alone, not when your happiness was at stake. Tonight they gave me the proof." He stood up and began to pace the room, his movements agitated, a caged panther of rage and humiliation. The green card, he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. The inheritance. It was all just a business transaction to them. My entire life, my future, it was a line item on their balance sheet. He stopped in front of the window, staring out at the dark, quiet Georgetown street. I gave her everything, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. I was ready to give her my whole life. And she was laughing at me. The whole time. He turned back to me, his eyes burning with a new cold fire. The heartbroken boy was gone, replaced by a man who had just been brutally and irrevocably awakened. What do we do now? He asked. It was not the question of a child asking for guidance. It was the question of a partner asking for a strategy. For the first time he was seeing me not just as his mother but as an ally. First, I said, my voice calm and strategic, you will go to her hotel in the morning. You will end it. You will be clear, you will be final, and you will not allow for any negotiation. There will be no tears, no recriminations. It will be a clean surgical cut. You will inform her that your lawyers will be in touch regarding her fraudulent intentions in seeking this marriage. A fact that you now have on tape and will not hesitate to share with the State Department and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He nodded, his jaw tight. Done. Second, I continued, you will immediately call the credit card company and cancel the supplementary card you gave her. You will inform them that any charges made from this point forward are fraudulent. You will sever every single financial tie. Immediately. Done? He repeated, his voice like flint. And third, I said, leaning forward slightly, you will let me handle the rest. This is no longer just a personal matter. Julian, this was an attempt to defraud our family, and that is something I take very, very seriously. He looked at me, at the quiet, formidable woman sitting in the lamplight, and I could see the understanding dawning in his eyes. He was finally beginning to comprehend the depth and breadth of the power I wielded, a power that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a lifetime of experience in a world he had never known. He had asked me to be a mother, but what he needed now, what they had all so foolishly underestimated, was the ambassador. The following morning Julian executed his part of the plan with a cold surgical precision that would have made me proud. He arrived at the Dubois upscale hotel at 9 a.m. sharp, his face a mask of calm, implacable resolve. He found them in the hotel's breakfast room, huddled together over coffee and croissants, no doubt planning their next move, still operating under the mistaken belief that this was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with more lies and charm. He didn't sit down. He stood at their table, a tall, imposing figure of judgment. He spoke to Emily, but his words were for all of them. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, and absolutely final. The engagement is over, he said. The wedding is of course cancelled. My lawyer will be in contact with you regarding the return of the ring and a few other legal matters. I have also taken the liberty of cancelling the supplementary credit card. Emily, seeing her last hope for a negotiated settlement vanish, tried one final desperate gambit. Tears welled in her eyes, her face a mask of tragic, misunderstood love. Julian, darling, you cannot do this, she wept. You are letting your mother poison you against me. I love you. Julian looked at her beautiful lying face, and he felt nothing. The love he had felt for her, so all-consuming just 24 hours ago, had been burned out of him, leaving only the cold, hard ash of betrayal. No, Emily, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute finality. My mother didn't poison me. She gave me the antidote. You, on the other hand, gave me a recording of yourself, in your own words, detailing your plan to use me for a green card and then divorce me for my money. I believe the term is marriage fraud. I'm told the penalties for that are quite severe. I suggest you and your parents make your travel arrangements back to France as quickly as possible. Goodbye. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their failed con, the bill for their overpriced breakfast now a ticking time bomb on their table. The consequences for the Dubois family were swift and total. The cancelled credit card was just the beginning. The life of casual luxury they had been enjoying in D.C. came to an abrupt and brutal end. The hotel, upon discovering their primary method of payment was no longer valid, politely but firmly informed them that their stay was being curtailed. They were left scrambling, their elaborate scheme in ruins. Their grand American adventure had turned into a humiliating rout. They had come to conquer a fortune, and they were leaving with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bitter taste of a spectacular failure. Meanwhile, I made a few quiet calls of my own. I did not call immigration. That had been a threat, a tool to ensure their immediate departure. A messy public immigration case would bring an unwelcome spotlight onto Julian and my family. My methods were always more discreet. I made a call to a friend, a high-ranking cultural attaché at the French embassy. I told him a vague diplomat's version of the story, framing it as an unfortunate social matter involving a young woman who had shown poor judgment. I made another call to the director of the gallery where Amélie worked. I didn't need to say much. In the rarefied, interconnected world of international art, a quiet word from a woman like me was enough. Amélie would find her professional reputation in Washington, and indeed in the wider art world, irrevocably tarnished. She had tried to play in the big leagues, and she had been resoundingly cast out. The doors she had worked so hard to open would now be quietly but firmly closed to her, forever. It was a quiet, elegant, and utterly complete checkmate. There was no drama, no shouting, no public scandal, just the silent, efficient dismantling of their ambitions. It was how I had always worked. It was how a true diplomat wages war. A week later, Julian came to my study again. The frantic, angry energy was gone. The raw, wounded heartbreak was still there, but it was quieter now, tempered by a new somber gravity. He looked older, wiser. He had survived his first real heartbreak, his first real betrayal, and it had changed him. He didn't apologize for his blindness, not in words. He didn't need to. It was there in the new, respectful way he looked at me, in the quiet deference of his posture. He had come not as a son to his mother but as a man seeking the counsel of an equal. We sat for a long time, not talking about Amélie but about the world. He asked me questions about my career he had never asked before, not the polite, superficial questions about meeting famous people, but real, substantive questions about strategy, about negotiation, about how to read the hidden intentions behind a person's words. He was for the first time trying to understand the woman I truly was, not just the mother he had always known. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally said, his voice quiet. "Not just for her. I'm sorry I never truly saw you. I saw the ambassador, the socialite, the woman who ran a big company. I never saw the strategist, the survivor." A small, sad smile touched my lips. "Your father always said my greatest strategic asset was that people consistently underestimated me," I said, my voice tinged with the wry wisdom of a lifetime of experience. "He said I had a way of making powerful men feel so comfortable that they would willingly hand me the keys to their own kingdoms." "And their confessions," Julian added, a flicker of a grim smile on his own face. "And their confessions." I agreed. I looked at my son, at the fine, strong man he was, a man who was now, finally, ready to see the world, not just as a place of beauty and design, but as a complex, and sometimes dangerous chessboard. He had learned a hard and painful lesson. He had learned that the greatest threats often come with the most charming smiles, and that the greatest strength is not in what you show the world, but in what you hold in reserve. Our relationship, which had been a comfortable, loving, but ultimately superficial thing, was now poised to be rebuilt on a new foundation, a foundation of truth, of mutual adult respect. He had lost a fiancée, but he had, in a strange and painful way, finally gained a mother, and I had finally been able to show my son the full, unvarnished truth of who I was. "I'm glad you finally see it too," I said, raising my brandy glass in a silent toast. He raised his own, and in his eyes I saw not just the reflection of his mother, but the dawning respect of a man who finally understood the quiet, formidable power of the woman who had saved him.